Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Kozlowski, Associate Director of the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History and Director of the Center for the Art and Architectural History of Port Cities, a collaboration between the O'Donnell Institute and the Museo di Capodimonte in Naples. I'm pleased to welcome you to the second lecture in our series of summer lectures dedicated to art and culture on the Bay of Naples, from antiquity to today. Although we wish we were able to welcome our speaker and our audience in person in Naples, we're happy to present the lecture digitally to an audience in both Italy and the United States, and indeed beyond. I'm honored to welcome today Bianca de Divitiis, Associate Professor of Art History at the University of Naples, Federico II, and a leading scholar of Renaissance art and architecture in Italy. Her many publications, which focus primarily on architecture, antiquarianism, and patronage in Renaissance Naples and the Italian South, include her 2006 monograph, Architettura e Committenza nella Napoli del Quattrocento, and the 2018 volume, co-edited with Kathleen Christian, Local Antiquities, Local Identities, Art, Literature, and Antiquarianism in Europe, 1400 to 1700. Her forthcoming book, slated for publication later this year, is titled Il Rinascimento e il Regno, Memoria Storica, Cultura Antiquaria, Committenza Artistica tra Tardo Medioevo e Prima Età Moderna. She is the recipient of many awards, including fellowships from the Warburg Institute and Villa Itati, and grants from the European Research Council and the Italian Ministry of Education, Universities, and Research. Her lecture today reframes our geographies of Renaissance architecture by focusing on the Italian South and its complex dynamics of style, antiquarianism, collaboration between architects and sculptors, as well as patrons and humanists, and the interplay between the local and the global. The title of her lecture is Naples and Beyond, Patterns of Renaissance. Welcome, Bianca de Divitiis.
Hello. I would like, first of all, to thank Sarah Kozlowski and Michael Thomas for inviting me to this lecture series, and also Francesca Santamaria and Heather Bowling for making this digital lecture possible. When we think of Naples, the first images that come to mind are those of the Baroque splendor or of the impressive discoveries of Pompeii and Herculaneum. It is surely less known that Naples and southern Italy in general played a prominent role in the patterns of Renaissance culture, both artistic and literary. Its territory conceals important monuments from the 15th and 16th centuries, which have been overshadowed by works from later periods, and also deeply misunderstood within a monolithic notion of Renaissance, which has for a long time been exclusively Florentine and Roman. The heart of Renaissance in southern Italy corresponds to two important phases of the Spanish dominion, the Aragonese in the 15th century and the Viceroyal in the first years of the 16th century. With the conquest of Naples in 1442, Alfonso V of Aragon added to his possessions, which already extended on a Mediterranean scale, a vast area that corresponded to a third of the Italian peninsula, confirming Naples as a capital of this new transnational kingdom. Claiming a sort of family right, after conquering Granada in 1492, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Castile turned his ambition towards the domains of his Aragonese cousins, already weakened by the French conquest of Charles VIII. And in 1503, Ferdinand II incorporated southern Italy into the Spanish monarchy. This area, which could boast the most conspicuous remains of antiquity outside Rome, corresponded to what was the one and only Italian kingdom, at the time already 4 centuries old. In this lecture, I will try to bring out the specific nature of Renaissance culture in southern Italy as another Renaissance, that is, a type of culture that was fully aware of the new trends and ideas that were emerging in other parts of Italy, but at the same time was autonomous and alternative in the ways in which such ideas were developed. As we will see, rather than the imitation of classical orders, other issues took priority instead, such as the impact of the conspicuous presence of surviving antiquities, the strength of the local medieval tradition, and a transnational dimension enhanced by centuries of foreign domain. Furthermore, I will look at the delicate moment between the end of the Aragonese rule and the Spanish conquest of southern Italy, trying to trace the artistic reflections of the delicate passage from an autonomous kingdom to a viceroyal possession of the kingdom, which in those years was extending itself across the Atlantic. Let's begin from one of the few images of Naples to have enjoyed some renown, Castelnuovo, the main royal residence, where we can observe in the first instance the specific nature of Renaissance in Naples and southern Italy. In reconstructing Castelnuovo on the ruins of the previous Angevin castle, Alfonso claimed to have found inspiration from the reading of the ancient treatise of Vitruvius, the De Architectura. The magnificent marble arch at the entrance, maybe the most important building site of the Mediterranean of those years, expresses all the complexity of this Renaissance. It's strategically engaged in scale and form with royal medieval monuments of Alfonso's predecessors, such as the gate of the Swabian Emperor Frederick II or the royal Angevin tombs in Naples, to establish legitimacy and continuity through the images of Alfonso's monarchical rule. At the same time, the architectural language inspired by Roman triumphal arches, such as Trajan's Arch in Benevento or the Arch of the Sergi in Pula in Dalmatia, reinforced the image of a king imbued with new humanistic culture who guided his transnational kingdom according to a system of classical virtues. The Sala Antica entrance, followed by the monumental Catalan ribbed vault of the vestibule, provides an immediate foretaste of the general character of the building, where the new elements that imitated antiquity and Catalan features were combined with the strategic arrangement of antiquities displayed in the courtyard to express complex political and genealogical messages. At the end of the Catalan staircase leading to the Gran Sala, Alfonso expressively displayed the statue of a sleeping nymph that was presented through an inscription written by the court humanist Antonio Paranormita as an image of the mythic founder of Naples, Parthenope, resting in peace after many years of war. To the side of the door were displayed two marble bas-relief portraits of the emperors Trajan and Hadrian, whom Alfonso claimed as his ancestors, since, like him, they had Spanish origins and had been in charge of a vast empire. Such display, created through the integration of architecture, sculpture, and epigraphy, connected Alfonso with the mythical origins of his new capital and presented his dual image as Rex Hispanicus, that is Spanish king, and as new king of Naples. After the exodus of many artists following the death of Alfonso in 1458, the artistic flourishing of the Aragonese kingdom under his successor, Ferdinand Ferrante, can be recognized in the great residences of the members of the court, such as the Palace of Roberto Sanseverino or the Palace of Diomede Carafa, both in Naples. These palaces record antiquity not through the use of architectural orders, but by the means of uniform rusticated stone facades, in opus isodomum, that is, regular stone blocks displayed according to one of the two types of wall constructions described by Vitruvius, but reinterpreted according to local antiquarian sources. Elements such as the Ionic portal, inspired by Leonbattista Alberti in the Carafa Palace, tell us of a wide range of choices offered by a large metropolis as Naples, and of original solutions that arose from the overlapping of local needs with stimuli that derived from exchanges with the outside. As already clear from Castelnuovo, in this context, the new All'Antica idiom and the equally new Catalan idiom imported by the Aragonese royals were not seen as contradicting elements, but as two elements equally essential to appear up to date. In some cases, cultivated patrons passed easily from a style to another, as in the case of the Count Onorato II Caetani in Fondi, who decorated his palace with refined Catalan carvings, while the Church of the Assunta presents Isodomos rusticated facade, as similar to the ones we've seen before. To have an idea of the extent of contemporary experimentation in New All'Antica project, it is useful to look at the renovation works carried out in the city of Nola, near Naples, between 1463 and 1478 by the Count Orso Orsini. From the De Nola, which is a pioneer description of Nola written by the Nolan humanist Ambrogio Leone and published in Venice in 1514, we know that during his rule, Orso tried to transform Nola into a new All'Antica city and to bring to light material traces of the ancient glory of the city where the Emperor Augustus had died and which were no longer visible. The research for antiquities carried out by Orso were effectively summarized in Leone's reconstruction map of ancient Nola, which included references to the places where excavations were underway and to the swellings in the soil that concealed ancient monuments. The starting point of Orso's renovation was his own palace. The palace shows again a conscious reuse of the Vitruvian Opus Isodomum and an All'Antica inscription running across the entire length of the facade. The facade was built with authentically ancient materials, just excavated from the Roman amphitheatre of Nola. Furthermore, rather than composing a new monumental inscription with his own name, Orso decided to monumentalize two inscriptions relating the supposed founders of the Orsini family, Ursus Salus and his wife, Vituria. These inscriptions were considered at the time to be authentically ancient and played a central role in the contemporary humanistic debate on the origin of the Orsini family. The inscription on the facade of the palace shows that what confronts us here is not an unconscious reuse of an abundance of spolia found on site. On the contrary, the project of the Orsini Palace was animated by an exceptional degree of antiquarian awareness by a baron who in those same years was writing a pioneering military treatise and owned a notable library full of manuscripts and newly printed books. Also here, Catalan tracery was included in the windows at the base of the refined All'Antica facade. With its three modes of reference to antiquity through material, the isodomous system, and the inscription, the palace predated the much more famous Cancelleria in Rome, generally regarded as the first example where these features were employed together. With the same antiquarian and philological approach, Orso tried to transform the medieval square in front of the cathedral into a new All'Antica forum, again using authentically ancient materials. After giving the piazza a larger quadrangular form, Orso displayed on its perimeter ancient statues of togaed figures representing members of the local elite, and placed them on pedestals with different provenances that bore inscriptions commemorating eminent local personalities who had given generous gifts to the city. The heterogeneous provenances of the ancient elements used in the square confirms that this antiquarian space did not result from a single archaeological find, but is a modern reconstruction, implying a concerted effort to find, move, and display statues on appropriate bases in order to create a public collection of portraits of worthy ancient Nolans, as well as an All'Antica stage for a new Renaissance prince, as Orso. The search for visual and material affinity with the ancient local part finds an interesting reflection in the palaces of Capua, near Naples again, where the members of the local elite developed a common way of redeploying antiquity by inserting in the bases of the portal jambs spolia with a recognizable local provenance, such as moved blocks of limestone from the ancient Capuan amphitheatre, or funerary inscriptions, also stele featuring standing togated figures. The presence of such spolia is made even more striking by the contrast between the white limestone of the ancient elements and the dark grey of local stone in which the rest of the portals were constructed. a two-colour scheme that seems to have become a local fashion used in palaces of different dimensions and different architectural features. The Roman citizens portrayed in their official dress and often identified by their names placed at the entrances of the palaces were more ordinary than important mythic ancestors like Parthenope or Ursus. But at the same time, these were real ancestors that attested that the communities of families living in those palaces had their roots in an ancient and authenticated past, thus justifying Capua's privileged status within the Kingdom of Naples. That there was an awareness governing these choices is made clear from the systematic character of the phenomenon widespread across the city, as we have seen. It becomes even more evident if we consider this other palace, built in Capua at the turn of the 16th century. With its use of classical orders, the building is an example of Tuscan Renaissance style incorporated into Capua, and confirms that the Florentine stylistic vocabulary was just one of the many possible ways of choosing to be all'antica. One, moreover, that did not necessarily meet the requirements of the Capuan elite, who preferred to incorporate ancient material of local origin, such as stele and blocks from the amphitheatre. It should also be noted that the same group of families responsible for the invention of the Capua and l'Antica portal were the same who, from 1514 onwards, issued several decrees that tried to regulate the spoliation of the stones of the amphitheatre of Capua by declaring it's important for the identity of the city. Regarding the amphitheatre as their own archaeological property, the Capuan elite tried to ensure that the few surviving arches of the monument remained standing, not only to preserve this testimony of the glory of the ancient Capua, but also to preserve the source from which the stones that had been used in the buildings of the new city had been taken, thus reinforcing the idea that the ancient city lived again in the new one. These stylistic elements, together with the deeply humanistic inscriptions as the one of the Orsini Palace, or chancery documents as the one we have seen from Capua, tell us of the great antiquarian awareness and architectural knowledge underlying these projects. Significantly, however, in no case but one do we have information about the architect involved. In 1470, Novello da San Lucano signed the facade of the San Severino Palace in Naples, defining himself egregius architectus, or distinguished architect of the palace. The inscription, carved in a marble tablet in refined capital lettering, is recognized as the first signature of an architect in Renaissance Italy, and it was most probably inspired by the ancient signature of the architect Cocceius Auctus, still visible at the time on the side of the so-called Temple of Augustus in Pozzuoli. This is a unique case in the context of southern Italy, where very few 15th and 16th century works were signed or can be associated with some certainty to the name of a single architect. An interesting statement on how we should understand the situation can be found in the 1524 letter sent by the Neapolitan humanist Pietro Summonte to his Venetian friend Marcantonio Michel to describe the state of arts in Naples. While discussing the suburban villa of Poggioreale, Summonte provides not one name, but a list of names of architects who had worked on its construction, namely Giuliano da Maiano, Francesco di Giorgio Martini, Frangiocondo da Verona, Antonio Marchesi de Settignano. Summonte's statement describes perfectly the essence of authorship in southern Italy, where instead of being attributed to the responsibility of a single architect, works should be regarded as the result of a collective and choral reflection on architecture, shared by foreign and local architects, but also by humanists and patrons. In the case of Poggioreale, it has recently been demonstrated that the list of people responsible for the conception of what was one of the most magnificent all'antica villas of the 15th century should be extended to include a further architect, Giuliano da Sangallo, as well as the major humanists of the Aragonese court, Giovanni Pontano and Jacopo Sanazzaro, as well as the patron himself, Duke Alfonso of Calabria, later Alfonso II. As we have seen, a similar collaboration had occurred earlier on an even grander scale on Castelnuovo, where established local and foreign architects and sculptors worked side by side, also with humanists, to create the complex image of Alfonso I of Aragon, and modern scholars still find it difficult to say which of them did what. Despite being conceived as an avant-garde castle, after 30 years, Castelnuovo no longer met the needs of self-representation and taste of the Aragonese royals. It was in response to the desire of Ferrante of Aragon, who no longer wanted to stay allo castello, that is, in the castle, that in 1488 Lorenzo de' Medici sent to Naples the model of a magnificent palace designed by his favorite architect Giuliano da Sangallo, together with Giuliano himself, as a gift for the King of Naples. If it had been built, the royal palace would have been one of the largest royal residences in all Europe, capable of competing in magnificence with the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople. The particular shape of the courtyard, proposed on a reduced scale also in the Villa of Poggioreale and in the Lost Villa of the Duchesca, the two royal villas, offers an effective image of this collaboration between architects, humanists, and patrons in the development of new architectural themes. Similar to a rectangular amphitheatre, the original idea of the courtyard was the result of a shared reflection which developed most probably first in Florence in the collaboration between Lorenzo de' Medici and his architects, and then perfected in Naples through an exchange with learned patrons and humanists, in particular Pontano and Sanazzaro. Significantly enough, in the same period, Pontano and Sanazzaro were carrying out parallel research projects on the same type of architectural structures. It also seems that they favored the conception of this innovative feature by surveying prominent examples together with Giuliano himself and recreating through their writings the aspects and the effects which the new courtyards would generate. It is certainly possible that Giuliano's sketch of the steps of the amphitheatre of Capua and Sanazzaro's epigram in Theatrum Campanum celebrating the same amphitheatre were the result of a collaborative survey to the monument. The image of the voices and applause of ancient spectators echoing among the ruins, which Sanazzaro evokes in his epigram, would have been just the same as what Giuliano would have expected to recreate in the courtyard of the new royal palace. Antiquarian field trips, jointly carried out by architects and humanists, seem to have been a custom at the time and were occasionally sponsored by the Aragonese sovereigns, as demonstrated by the famous 1489 trip to Pozzuoli and Gaeta, for which Sanazzaro, together with the antiquarian and architect Fra Giocondo of Verona, were paid by the royal treasury. Pontano and Sanazzaro were already renowned at the time for their expert knowledge of antiquities of the kingdom and were used to sharing their knowledge with foreign architects arriving in Naples, most probably guiding them in the selection of authoritative models that would please the Aragonese love for antiquity. The identification of the ruins on the Lake of Avernus as the Temple of the Sibyl, which we find in Giuliano's drawing, further reveals the assistance provided by local humanists in the difficult task of associating material remains to ancient literary sources that recounted historical and mythological episodes occurred in the Phlegrean fields. The ruins were themselves already very monumental, but the association of the monument with the most important site mentioned in the 6th book of the Virgil's Aeneid would have increased its authority, legitimizing its use as a model for the Palatine Chapel of the new royal palace, as we see in this drawing. These episodes demonstrate not only the parallel interests of architects and humanists, but also mutual exchange and collective reflection that led to a new understanding of antiquity and ancient texts, and to the conception of new features for these new All'Antica projects. On the other hand, humanists themselves were knowledgeable of art and architecture, so knowledgeable of art and architecture as to claim artistic responsibility for the works they commissioned, as we can see from the signature Pontano's Fecit, which Pontano inlaid in the Maiolica pavement of the chapel, which he commissioned for himself and his family in Naples between 1490 and 1492. Confronted with such a picture of cultural ferment and artistic experimentation, what effect did the end of the kingdom have? Already the death of Alfonso in 1458 had represented a major disruption in the political and artistic life of the kingdom, causing the reduction of the Mediterranean territory to peninsular southern Italy and the exodus of many artists. The barbaric invasion of the French troops of Charles VIII in 1494 marked an even more dramatic discontinuity. On departing from Naples 1 year later, the French sovereign brought with him a considerable plunder, which, together with the bronze doors of Castelnuovo, included also the main protagonists of the Aragonese Renaissance, such as the sculptor Guido Mazzoni, author of the Sepolcro in Monteliveto, and Fra Giocondo da Verona, together with approximately 20 other minor artists. Southern Italy awoke from this traumatic experience no longer as an independent kingdom, but as a dependent of the Spanish kingdom and victim of the same successes and enterprises of Ferdinand II and of the Gran Capitan Gonzalo de Cordova, which in the previous years had been constantly celebrated in the streets of Naples as successors of the same royal family. The period after 1495 was certainly not a good time to build, and the years of transition and slow stabilization of the Spanish kingdom are generally seen as a dark time for Southern architecture. The advanced state of artistic research of those years is not, however, to be found in the imposing building sites of royal residences and palaces, but in works of smaller dimensions, which, although carried out at great expense, were executed in rather short times. A notable example is the Succorpo Chapel, built between 1497 and 1508 by Cardinal Oliviero Carafa under the main altar of the Cathedral of Naples to house the bones of San Gennaro and his own burial. Celebrated as the empress of all chapels, even before being finished, the Succorpo is the result of an extremely ambitious project, both from a liturgical point of view, but also from an architectural one, because of the difficulties connected with the need to dig beneath the fragile apse of the cathedral, and because it was executed entirely out of marble. Here too, the problem of authorship of the project is complex, not only because, as often happens in Naples, the architect and sculptor who carried out the work is different from the one who designed it. In this case, the execution of the chapel is attributed to the Lombard sculptor Tommaso Malvito. But even in the case of the Succorpo, it is difficult to identify one single author. The sophisticated solution inspired by the antique used to create both the flat coffered ceiling as well as the windows with oblique walls that allow light to enter the chapel, have led to identify as possible author the architect Donato Bramante, who in those years was carrying out for the Cardinal Carafa the cloister of Santa Maria della Pace in Rome. At the same time, we can recognize a change of project in the area of the altar, where a more essential All'Antica idiom replaces the hyper-ornamented style used for the rest of the chapel, and where a surprising quotation of the thin columns in the angles from Brunelleschi's Sagrestia Vecchia suggests a different set of references. One should not underestimate the role of Oliviero himself in the choice to reread, according to a new all'antica style, Paleochristian themes, such as the three-nave plan of the basilica, the facing niches which evoke catacombs, and the sculpted roundels with hearse busts portraying Neapolitan bishops and protomartyrs in the ceiling, which recall the ones depicted in the catacombs of San Gennaro Extremeña in Naples. This sacred platoon watches over the saints' relics and over the effigy of Oliviero himself, portrayed in a life-size marble statue, kneeling in an act of praying in front of a prie-dieu. On one hand, the statue may be compared with Iberian models, such as the tomb of Alfonso of Castile in Burgos and viceroyal tombs in Catania and Messina. On the other hand, as an independent figure, freed from any framework, Oliviero's statues creates a three-dimensional display that involves the entire space of the chapel in a mode developed during the 15th century among the greater barons of the Kingdom of Naples, in particular in Apulia, in the fiefdoms of the Del Balzo Orsini family. It is interesting to note that this baronial mode was promptly imitated by the Aragonese sovereigns, as demonstrated by the lost statue of Alfonso II, originally displayed in the chapel of the Duquesca. This Neapolitan Aragonese model would soon be exported to France with Guido Mazzoni's tomb of Charles VIII in Saint Denis. One may also discern the impact of these Neapolitan chapels when one looks at the funerary setting of Ferdinand and Isabella in the Capilla Real in Granada, executed just after Ferdinand's return from his visit to Naples in 1506, during which he would have most probably visited the portraits of his Aragonese cousins. Outstanding architectural and sculptural design, material magnificence, and speed of execution are at the heart of another extraordinary work during this period of transition, the chapel of the nobleman and humanist Galeazzo Caracciolo di Vico in the Neapolitan church of San Giovanni a Carbonara, built between 1514 and 1517. With its central plan and the refined use of architectural orders, the Caracciolo di Vico Chapel dialogues with the more mature works of the Roman and Florentine Renaissance, such as Bramante's Tempietto of San Pietro in Montorio, Raphael's Chigi Chapel in Santa Maria del Popolo, and Giuliano da San Gallo's Rotunda for the Cestello Monastery in Florence. At the same time, the chapel is in direct continuity with local researchers, as the long tradition of study of circular plans in Campania, and for which Galeazzo could boast the authoritative family precedent of the Caracciolo del Sole Chapel, placed just behind the high altar of the same church. Furthermore, the oblique arch of the entrance quotes the windows of the Subcorpo, completed only a few years before. The antiquarian edition of the order reflects the most advanced research on the Doric, which was subject of study in Naples as it was in Rome, as demonstrated also by the sophisticated references to the proportions of the Doric frieze with triglyphs and metopes that we find in the epigrams of the humanist Jacopo Sanazzaro. Here too, the question of the attribution of the design is still up for debate, while the execution is now recognized for being the work of the local architect Giovanni Mormando. At the same time, it is precisely to the humanist Jacopo Sanazzaro, author of the epitaphs carved at the entrance of the chapel, that one may ascribe a decisive role in suggesting the integration of the most advanced Roman and Florentine examples and the local models that we find in the chapel. These ideas may have been developed by Sanazzaro after his stay in Rome at the court of the Pope Leo X in 1513, where he was in close contact with Raphael and with Pietro Bembo, and where he found his old friend, the architect Fra Giocondo da Verona. Just like Pontano, Sanazzaro would have been sufficiently expert in architecture to advise on a project like this, and evidence of architectural knowledge is to be found in his many epigrams, in the indexes he compiled from Alberti's De Re Edificatoria, and in the disegno, that is, the design that he provided for the church of Santa Maria del Parto in Naples, where he was buried. It is well known that the marble altar of the Caracciolo di Vico chapel was executed by two sculptors and architects from Burgos, Bartolomeo Ordóñez and Diego de Siloe. Both would have been responsible for exporting to the Iberian Peninsula themes and motifs derived from the Caracciolo chapel in Naples. The erudite Doric was in fact reproduced by Ordóñez in the choir of the Cathedral of Barcelona, while the oblique entrance arch was reused by Diego de Siloe in the chapels of the choir of the newly built cathedral in Granada. The other sculptures of the Caracciolo di Vico chapel were instead made by the two main sculptors of Naples, Girolamo Santa Croce and Giovanni da Nola, together with their pupils. The same group of sculptures would soon begin to create magnificent marble monuments for the viceroys, which, together with the significant numbers of ancient sculptures, was shipped to Spain, as in the case of the monument of the Viceroy Raimondo de Cardona, which was carved in Naples and then displayed in the Cathedral of Belpuig. Even the magnificent monument of Don Pedro de Toledo in Naples was originally intended for the city of Villafranca in Spain. The same sculptures would also be responsible for the creation of the triumphal staging created to celebrate the entrance of the Emperor Charles V into Naples in 1535 on his return from the conquest of Tunis. The display consisted of triumphal arches and colossal statues with a precise iconographic program that celebrated at the same time the ruler as a new Hercules and the ancient origins of the city, evoked by the images of the mythical founders and patron saints. Similar complex artistic programs were also set up in other cities of the kingdom visited by the emperor. In Sessa, not far from Naples, in addition to ephemeral works, the entry of the emperor was celebrated with two inscriptions composed by the local humanist Agostino Nifo. These were purposely embedded in the walls outside the Seggio di San Matteo, alongside two ancient inscriptions that recounted the benevolence of the Emperor Trajan and his sister-in-law Matidia towards the city, thus creating an imperial genealogy that strengthened the Hispanic association of the city. Such display was part of a project of urban renewal of Sessa, carried out by the Spanish governor Lope de Herrera, who renewed Sessa in the name of Gonzalo II of Cordoba, nephew of the Gran Capitan, with the aim of magnifying the city's loyalty to Spanish rule, and at the same time glorifying the ducal family of the de Cordoba, who had ruled over the city since 1503, when the Gran Capitan, Gonzalo de Cordoba, had obtained it as a reward for having conquered the kingdom of Naples for Ferdinand II. The uninterrupted attachment of the family to the city throughout time had been demonstrated by the fact that Elvira de Cordoba, daughter of the Gran Capitan and mother of Gonzalo II, had died in Sessa in 1524, and Sessa was most probably intended as the site for the erection of the funerary monument for Elvira and her husband, Luis Fernandez, for which also Michelangelo was consulted, and was then designed by Giulio Romano and Gianfrancesco Pegni, as we can see from this drawing now preserved in Chatsworth. When Gonzalo II visited Sessa in 1548, Lope de Herrera greeted him with a wooden triumphal arch, decorated with the painted portraits of his parents and grandparents. On the same site, 10 years later, Lope de Herrera built a new city gate, decorating it with spolia that were not from an ancient monument, but from a new monument executed only a few years earlier. That is, the trophy that Gonzalo II had commissioned from the sculptor Giovanni da Nola to celebrate the memory of his grandfather, the Gran Capitan, and displayed in the bath of Mondragone. The trophy was inspired by the ancient model of the trophies of Mario in Rome. As an inscription composed by the learned historiographer Paolo Giovio explained, the monument was erected on the site where Gonzalo I had defeated the French troops in 1503. In 1558, the exceptional Antica work was moved by Lope de Herrera from Mondragone to Sessa in order to protect the peace from Saracen incursions. In remounting the Antica sculpture, Lope de Herrera added to the original inscription one that celebrated the transfer of the trophy as an express act of the citizens of Sessa. In this new context, the trophy was no longer a celebration of a single man, but a glorification of the entire family and civic pride of the city. While commissioning the trophy, Gonzalo II had further worked on the memory of his ancestor by commissioning from Giovio a biography of the Gran Capitan and to the sculptor Annibale Caccavello two marble monuments to commemorate Oded de Foix and Pedro Navarro, the two leaders of the French troops defeated by the Spanish in 1528, presenting them as a gesture of Iberian mercy towards the enemy. The monuments were placed in the chapel that had been begun in 1504 by the Gran Capitan in Naples and which he had left unfinished in 1508 when he was forced to return to Spain. While works were taking place in Sessa, a parallel celebration of Gonzalo was underway in Granada with the completion of the church of San Jeronimo, where the Gran Capitan was triumphantly commemorated on the exterior as the terror of Turks and Gauls. One might wonder if the funerary arrangement inside with life-size statues kneeling in the act of praying, in addition to the model of the Capilla Real, might derive from the direct knowledge of statues of Aragonese royals, of the Succorpo in Naples, and even those of the De Balzo Orsini family, which the Gran Capitan himself could have seen during the years he spent in Apulia before conquering Naples. At the same time that ancient and modern works, as well as iconographic and architectural motifs traveled from the Kingdom of Naples to Spain, Neapolitan horizons extended further to search for models in the new centers of imperial power in the Iberian Peninsula. A good example is the Palace of the Orsini di Gravina, long regarded as a provincial version of Bramante's Caprini Palace in Rome, with its rustication on the ground floor and the pilasters alternated with roundels on the first floor. The palace represents a nearly immediate resumption of the palace executed by Charles V within the Alhambra in Granada. One should read the transformation of the San Severino Palace into the Church of Gesù Nuovo at the end of the 16th century according to the same vision. While the imposing rusticated facade was preserved almost as a triumphal spolium, the interior of the new church was conceived following the model of the imperial church of San Lorenzo made for Philip II at the Escorial. Naples was now part of a system of viceroyal capitals in an empire that had moved beyond the boundaries of the known world, and where rapidly grown cities such as Mexico City and Lima arose incorporating spolia of a world that had rapidly become ancient. Within a new network of global exchanges, Naples was reached by a whole variety of new objects, such as the two obsidian knives from Mexico preserved in the Natural History Museum of Ferrante in Prato. Interestingly enough, even featherwork, so much admired by Dürer, would also become desirable objects in the kingdom, as demonstrated by the case of Diana Loffredo, Baroness of Amendolara in Calabria, in the very south of Italy, who at the turn of the 16th century of the 16th century, of the 17th century, preserved at home a unique piece of featherwork from New Spain representing St. Jerome and with the lion, which we can imagine similar to the one that we see on the right here. Therefore, while its antiquities and marble tombs were leaving Neapolitan soil, new objects from the New World were reaching southern Italy, increasing the splendor of its collections, offering new materials to study and possible new stories to recount. Thank you and goodbye.